Hello, everyone. This is criminal profiler Pat Brown, and this is going to be a very short video uh, because I want to make some points that weren't made in the 2020 ABC's 2020 show called The Confession, which was about the murder of Andrea Cincotta in Arlington, Virginia in 1998. Uh, this particular documentary, reasonably well done. I don't have any complaints about the majority of it. However, some people have asked me, well, Pat, why were you not in the documentary? Did you not work on this case? And the answer is yes, I did work on this case. As a matter of fact, one year after Andrea Cincotta was murdered, her son, Kevin Cincotta, asked me to come in and look at this case because the case was going nowhere. At that point in time, the police had focused entirely on Andrea Cincotta's fiancé, Chris Johnson, who they lived together, and they believed he killed her, in spite of the fact he actually ended up having an alibi that was airtight alibi, and in spite of that, they still had their eyes on him. Within one of the things that they found out early on in this crime was that a man had been in her condo a few weeks prior. There's a company called Trash Masters, and she was trying to get rid of a computer, and she saw this company outside. They weren't really a trash company. They were fixing mailboxes. She saw that outside, and she asked this man if she could get rid of a computer, and he said, oh, I would like it, because we're not a trash company, but I would like it. So she brought him up into her condo, into the bedroom where the computer was, gave it to him, and the police checked into that guy, and they decided he had nothing to do with the crime, that there was nothing linking him. They were still looking at the fiancé. So the son of Andrea Cincotta brought me in a year later, and he said, please look at this case. So I did. I interviewed Chris Johnson, and I felt he had nothing to do with this crime. And then I asked about this computer guy. And I asked about the situation where her car had gone missing and was found in Southeast Washington, in an area called Barry Farms. And the clutch had been destroyed. And immediately that set up a red flag to me, because these two could drive a clutch. So I'm like, hey, wait a minute. Why would you go there if you couldn't drive a clutch, unless you were going home? So I went over and I investigated this, and I determined that the person who killed her was likely an African-American man who couldn't drive a clutch and had a violent past. So I called up Trash Masters. I found out who they were, and they told me, yes, that actually the guy who had been to her house was a guy named Joe Leonard. He had a terribly violent past. He was a longtime felon. And as a matter of fact, he was in court the day I called, because he had abducted, and he had raped, and he had strangled, and he had left for dead a 13-year-old girl who he put in her closet, just like Andrea Cincotta had been put in a closet. So I'm like, this is the guy. This was 48 hours after I got involved in the case. And before I go into the rest of this, I want you to know I have a link to this program, because they did an excellent job as far as I'm very pleased that Chris Johnson got to finally speak up, because he's been quiet all these years, and he finally got to speak up. And so he has a lot of, he was able to tell his entire story. And I think that was very important. Also, his legal team, they were fantastic. And you say, well, wait a minute. If this guy, Joe Leonard, committed the crime, why the heck was this guy not just, why would he even be looked at any longer? He had an alibi. I'm going to tell you, first of all, but along with the link I have to this, there's also a link to my full analysis of this crime. Please go there. It's all my work on this crime, all the way from 1999, all the way through the recent trial of Chris Johnson. And so you'll get the full report. I also want to let you know that the story about Andrea Cincotta is also in my book, which I wrote in 2003. So yes, I was highly involved in this particular case. But people say, again, why aren't you in this documentary then? Well, I'll tell you why. Because documentaries have agendas, and sometimes the way production companies work, I'm not real comfortable with. They did call me, and they asked me to be in this documentary. And they told me they wanted me to come in as an expert, as a criminal profiler, not presenting my work in this case, which I didn't quite understand. But I said, am I going to be able to present my work? And they would not answer me. And they said, we want you as an expert. I said, okay, then are you paying me as an expert? And they say, no, we don't pay anybody to be in these documentaries because we're a news group. I'm like, you're all making money off this. And when you hire professionals, should be paid. So I turned that down because I'm not going to do expert work for television without being paid. I would have done just my part about the case itself that I had worked on, because and Chris Johnson wanted me to do this, but they would not agree to that, and they would not promise me that they would have my work in there. And I don't know what their issue was, why they wouldn't want that to be mentioned, but they had their own agendas. So anyway, so I wasn't in there. So let me tell you the quick story, and then I want you to go to my analysis. So yes, Bobby Joe Leonard is the guy that killed Andrea Cincotta. He's a serial killer. And that's what I told the police. After I got involved, I went to the police with Kevin Cincotta, her son, and I said, look, I'm a criminal profiler, and Bobby Joe Leonard committed this crime. Not only do I know from profiling he committed this crime, but I went to talk to his girlfriend, Danica Davis, at the time, and she said the police had never been there to talk to her. And I'm like, if they were investigating this crime and Bobby Joe Leonard was on their radar, why would they go talk to his girlfriend? And then I went up to Philadelphia, where I thought that he pawned her jewelry, and none of the pawnbrokers had seen the Arlington County Police Department either. So I knew that they were not doing a proper investigation. And this is really the reason I wanted to be on the show, was to say, and I told them this is what I wanted to say, and I don't think they wanted me to say it as strongly as I wanted to. This is police misconduct. They did not properly investigate the crime at all. They were so intent on making him guilty. They forced a confession out of him, which is what this is all about. They forced a confession out of him, a false confession. And then after he gave this false confession, they found out that Andrea Cincotta was murdered while he was at work. So he couldn't have even done it. And then the case just died right there. And he was told not to leave town, but they never got back to him. Years passed. Bobby Joe Leonard was in prison, but the suspicion still hung on poor Chris Johnson. And I did get a really nice compliment from his sister, a thank you from her. She said, thank you for doing this pro bono work on the case, because at least one professional, if not the police, is saying that he's not guilty. And that's something. And I felt good about that, because I'm glad I did some good, because I felt like this case, this wasn't going the way it should. And then you think, oh, this is okay. So then he's going on to live his life. But then all of a sudden, boom, last year, he gets arrested. Why? Because a cold case squad from the Arlington County Police Department and the prosecution office, they went back to talk to Bobby Joe Leonard. And they got him to say he would confess to this crime. Because he was, he's in prison for life anyway, but he wanted some deals, you see. And if he was going to confess to this crime, he didn't want the death penalty. Well, of course not. But they had, I believe, the Arlington County Police Department, the prosecution office, oh, unbelievable. I think they wanted so badly to make sure he went down because of all the work, all the stuff they had done to say he did it, that I believe they gave Bobby Joe Leonard a little idea. And it's not, I'm a serial killer, which he is, and I like to rape and choke women, which he does. But instead, he said, oh, yeah, well, I did kill her, but only because Chris Johnson hired me to do so. It was a hired hit. Chris Johnson was going to pay me $5,000 to kill her. So I went into her house. I choked her out, put her in the closet, and there was supposed to be $5,000 in the closet, but there wasn't. So I just didn't bother with it. Unbelievable. This is the story. And they arrested him. He was on home detention for almost a year, couldn't leave his house. Then he and his wife, the wife he's married to now, are terrified that when they go to court, the jury will fall for this nonsense and find him guilty. And thank God they did not. But what was shocking is just so much shocking stuff about this. You'll see this in the documentary, that not only did they arrest him and allow a serial killer to make up completely phony garbage in court, a completely phony story, which I think they fed him. That's my belief. And that's 100% police misconduct. The prosecution, the other thing they did was they got undercover police officers to actually go and claim they were Bobby Joe Leonard's relatives and say, we want our money. We want that money you owe Bobby Joe Leonard, trying to trick him. And they also wired up her son to try to trick him. It didn't work. But what kind of police department sends in police officers to terrify a man and his wife to try to get that information? That kind of stuff. I think they should be sued. I think that Arlington County Police Department should be sued for what they did to Chris Johnson. I think the prosecution was one of his progressive prosecutors, and I think stepped way out of line. And you'll see that in my video. I go into a whole thing on the police and the prosecution. I think they ought to be sued. It's very difficult to do it, but they should be sued. This is what I wanted to say in this documentary, if I had been allowed to be in it. Yes, I would want to say that I had profiled this crime back in 1999, that I had done the work and had figured it out within 48 hours. And if I can figure it out in 48 hours, why the hell didn't the police go after Bobby Joe Leonard? That's what I want to know. Why were they so intent on going after this innocent man? That's what I find so appalling about this whole thing. So, but I wasn't in the documentary, so that's the way things go. But I did want to say this about what I would have said, that the most important thing they should have pointed out here was the police and prosecutorial misconduct. And they didn't really even get into that many names of the police officers and the prosecutor. I don't even remember if her name was mentioned. She was, it's in my video below. So if you've seen this, now go check out my video because you get a lot more information. I'm not saying it was a bad documentary, because I'm happy for Chris Johnson for getting to speak out, and the legal team. I think they made a lot of good points in it, but I have way more points also to add to that in my analysis. So please do click on that and watch my whole analysis of the Andrea Cincotta case, my work, and what I thought happened in the police, with the police and the prosecutor, and what happened in the court, which was fascinating. I was asked by the prosecution. They tried to get me in there as a witness, and under some real squirrely stuff, and I managed to get out of it because I wasn't going to testify for the prosecution. And yes, things. I'm so glad Chris Johnson is finally free. That's what I can say. I'm glad he finally he was found not guilty. I'm glad he got to finally tell his story, because for 20 years, there are many people who just thought he was guilty, and he had no way to prove he wasn't. And so I'm really glad for Chris Johnson, really, really super glad for him. The killer of Andrea Cincotta is in prison for life, where he needs to be, not out on the street. But I believe if they had done their job correctly, when she was murdered in 1998, and if they had done the job correctly and come up with the same conclusion I did, that this was a serial killer, they could have gone after Bobby Joe Leonard and kept him from raping and almost murdering that 13-year-old girl. But they didn't do their job. So anyway, that's my comment on this. And please do say check the links below and get the full story. And I thank you for being here and listening. Please do like and subscribe to the channel. I would appreciate that as well, because it keeps the work going. Bye.